Hello everyone, and in today's lecture we are going to talk about sectioning, and I will be discussing what is sectioning and the 5 kinds of microtome. So what is sectioning? Sectioning is a process whereby tissues are cut into uniformly thin slices or sections with the aid of a machine to facilitate the studies under the microscope. So the machine that we're talking about is called the microtome. So the microtome is a machine or an instrument designed for the actual cutting of thin sections of tissues. So here are the 5 kinds of microtome. First, you have sliding microtome, rotary microtome, freezing microtome, rocking microtome, and ultra-thin sectioning microtome. So first, we have the sliding microtome. It is for cutting celluloid embedded sections, and it was invented by Adams in 1789. So the sliding microtome has 2 models, and these are the base ledge type microtome and the standard sliding type microtome. The base ledge type microtome. It consists of 2 movable pillars holding the adjustable knife to be set at an angle for cutting celluloid sections. The chuck or block holder is set on a heavy metal base which may be moved backwards and forwards under the knife. The chuck is fitted into the micrometer screw, which is in turn connected to the ratchet feed wheel. When the handle is turned, the ball comes in contact with the ratchet feed wheel, which in turn rotates the micrometer screw. The block holder is raised towards the knife at a thickness predetermined by a micrometer gauge. It is suited for sectioning specimens from tough tissue blocks which may offer great resistance to the knife. Large sections are more easily cut with the knife set at an angle due to less resistance offered by the block. Sections are cut in a perfectly flat plane, thereby making an excellent serial tissue section. So in standard sliding type microtome, the block remains stationary while the knife is moved backwards and forwards during the process of sectioning. This is the most dangerous type of microtome due to the movable exposed knife. A slow but steady motion is therefore required to manipulate the instrument. In both the base ledge and standard sliding microtomes, the knife is set obliquely for celluloid sections or straight for large refractory paraffin blocks, cutting both large and small tissues with ease. It is especially recommended for cutting extremely hard and rough tissue blocks. The next kind of microtome is the rotary microtome. It's used for cutting paraffin embedded sections. It was invented by Minot in 1885 to 1886, and it is the most common type used for both routine and research laboratories. The microtome is operated by rotation of the flywheel, causing reciprocal motion of the knife over the block. The thickness of the section being automatically regulated by the ratchet feed wheel, which in turn rotates the micrometer screw, thus making the block move towards the knife at a predetermined rate. Adjustment screws have been made so that the block is parallel to the microtome at all planes. It is different from the rocking microtome in that the knife and the block holder are brought together by upward and vertical motions, cutting sections in a perfectly flat plane, thereby allowing excellent serial sections to be made. It is heavier and more stable than the rocking microtome. It is complex in design and construction and is therefore more expensive. It may be used for cutting large blocks of tissue, although results are better when the sliding microtome is used. The knife is used in a blade-up position and therefore relatively dangerous. Next kind is the freezing microtome. It is used extensively for cutting unembedded tissues that have been frozen with carbon dioxide and other refrigerants, and it was invented by Quichet in 1848. In freezing microtome, the stage or block holder is hollow and perforated around its perimeter, attached to a reinforced flexible lead pipe through which carbon dioxide passes from a cylinder. A simple lever-operated valve allows the release of rapid intermittent bursts of carbon dioxide, which will freeze the block holder and the tissue evenly. A second cooling device for lowering the temperature of the knife is also incorporated in most machines to facilitate sectioning. The knife holder is attached to a lever which is in turn connected to a pawl. When the operating handle is moved back, the knife is moved back to its original position, away from the block. The lever is, in turn, moved, causing the pawl to get in contact with the ratchet feed wheel and thereby turn the micrometer screw. The block holder is then raised towards the knife at a predetermined thickness. By pulling the operating handle forward, the section is cut as the knife edge slices through the raised tissue block. The microtome is firmly clamped to the edge of the bench for use or mounted on a specially constructed shelf with CO2 cylinder below. And it is used to cut undehydrated tissues in frozen state, especially in instances such as when rapid diagnosis is required, when histological demonstration of fat is needed, when certain neurological structures are to be studied, and when sensitive tissue constituents to be studied are damaged or destroyed by heat. The next kind is rocking microtome. It is used for cutting serial sections of large blocks of paraffin and then embedded tissues. It was invented by Trefal in 1881. It is the simplest among the different types of microtomes. The Cambridge type is available in two sizes and may be used to cut small and large blocks of paraffin tissues. It has been proved to be ideal for serial sections in actual practice, producing ribbons of 60 to 90 sections with ease. The rocking microtome has recently been incorporated into cryostat for cutting unfixed tissues at a temperature of negative 20 degrees Celsius, due to the relatively inexpensive cost of both knife and machine and the simplicity of the machine. This type of microtome consists of a heavy base and two arms, the lower arm resting on pivots and a supporting column, and is attached to the micrometer screw, at the base of which is found the ratchet wheel with feed mechanism. The upper arm carrying the block holder on one end by means of a screw is connected to a lever by a piece of nylon thread. When the lever is pulled forward, the ball is brought into contact with the ratchet feed wheel to which the mill head screw micrometer screw attached. The ratchet wheel is turned rotating the micrometer screw. The lower arm is elevated, which in turn raises the upper arm at its fulcrum, thereby carrying the chuck of block holder towards the knife. As the pressure on the operating handle or lever is released, the tension on the spring causes the upper arms to return to its normal position. In an arc of a circle, the section is thereby cut as the tissue passes to the knife edge in a slightly curved plane in 10 to 12 micron thickness. And the last kind of microtome is the ultra-thin sectioning microtome. It is used for cutting sections for electron microscopy. The thinness of sections attained in this microtome is 0.5 micron. The knife used for cutting the ultra-thin sections consists mainly of selected fragments of broken plate glass. The specimen is small and fixed in osmium tetroxide and embedded in plastic. And we should always keep in mind that the type of microtome to be used depends upon the type of work, the nature of tissue preparations, and the embedding mediums.
Okay, so now we will be talking about the major parts of the microtome. First is the block holder. This is also known as the chuck. So this part of the microtome holds the tissue block in place so that medtechs won't need to use their hands in order to hold the tissue block in place. Next, knife and knife carrier. So this part of the microtome is actually used in cutting the tissue blocks. And the ball, ratchet, feed wheel, and adjustment screw. So they line up tissue in proper position and adjust the thickness of each tissue section. So the pictures that you see are rotary microtomes with label. Okay. Next, care of the rotary microtome. First one that we need to keep in mind is that after cutting the tissue on the microtome, we should check for all accumulated paraffin and tissue, and they should be brushed away with a soft brush. Take note of that. Should be soft brush. Next, all metal parts may be wiped with clean Cylol. So avoid continuous application of Cylol to the rest of the machine as Cylol will remove the painted finish. The machine must be dried carefully with particular attention to the area under the stage or the knife holder. Keep this area well oiled to prevent rust formation. Next, moving parts of the microtome must be kept oiled. And last, the microtome should be covered when not in use to prevent accumulation of dust and dirt which may interfere with the sectioning of the tissues. Next are the microtome knives. So these are the parts of a microtome knife. First is the cutting edge. So this is found in the tapered edge of the knife, the side which is more inclined to each other. A good cutting edge should be made of good quality steel, and too soft cutting edges are likely to become dull easily, while too hard edges are likely to produce nicks and jagged edges and irregularities on the knife edge, thereby producing tears and striations during cutting. So a good cutting edge must be able to cut good sections from a paraffin wax block without any serration noted on examination. Next is the wedge. Next, knife back. So the knife back is a spring-loaded semicircular sheet of metal flipped onto the knife to hold the cutting edge at a constant angle. So this should not be interchanged with the knife back of other microtome knives to keep the bevel angle constant at all times. Next one is the bevel angle. So this is the angle formed between the cutting edges, and this is usually 27 to 32 degrees. Next, wedge angle. So the wedge angle is the angle formed between the wedge knife. So this is usually 5 to 14 degrees. Yeah. So the surfaces of this are highly polished so that sections will not adhere to the knife but will move on the surface. Folding, distortion, and sticking will be prevented and good ribbon formation will be facilitated. Next, the clearance angle. So this is the angle formed between cutting facets presenting to the block and the surface of the block. This is normally 5 to 15 degrees. So if this angle is not achieved, the cutting edge will wedge or compress the block as the block slides under the knife. No sections will be obtained at all for 2 or 3 strokes. Then the block suddenly expands and very thick sections are obtained. Missed sections or alternately thick and thin sections are most commonly the result of neglecting to allow proper angle or clearance between the block surface and the cutting facet. Next, three types of microtome knives. So here are the three types of microtome knife. The first one is the plain concave. This is usually 250 millimeters in length, and one side is flat and the other is concave. That's why it's called plain concave. Okay. So less concave sides are recommended for cutting solid and embedded tissue blocks on a sliding microtome, while more concave ones are used for cutting paraffin sections on base ledge, rotary or rotating microtome. So the picture in here is the image of a plain concave knife. Next type of microtome knife is a biconcave. So this is usually 120 millimeters in length and both sides are concave. That's why it's called biconcave. And it is recommended for cutting paraffin embedded sections on a rotary microtome. Last is the plain wedge. It is usually 100 millimeters in length and both sides are straight. So this is recommended for frozen tissue sections or for cutting extremely hard and tough specimens embedded in paraffin blocks using a base ledge type or fusing microscope. So the image shown here is a plain wedge knife.
It is important to learn on how to use and take care the microtome knives, especially to someone who is working in a pathology laboratory. A sharp knife in good condition is indispensable to the histologic technologist, and it is the most important requirement for satisfactory sectioning. Now, there are methods in sharpening your knife, and we'll be tackling those, and the first one is the honing. This is the removal of gross nicks on the knife edge to remove blemishes and irregularities from the knife edge. Now, the jagged edges on the knife edge will produce tears or striations in the tissue sections, which will be greatly magnified under the microscope, and it is usually done on a stone or a honing proper. Now, there are directions in using this. So it is heel to toe. The knife should be fitted to its corresponding knife back and should be placed on one end of the hone. And with the cutting edge first, the heel or the handle end is drawn obliquely or diagonally towards the operator on the stone until the toe or the head portion is reached. And the second method is stropping. It is the removal of the burr or irregularities formed during honing and the final polishing of the knife edge. And if the knife has become dull after use but is free of nicks, it is usually necessary only to strop it. So straps should be of the best quality of shell horse leather. And the direction in using this is the reverse of honing. It is toe to heel, and the knife is drawn obliquely on the strop with the cutting edge behind, which is the edge last, is also pushed backward and drawn forward. Around 40 to 120 double strokes are usually required in stropping. Now, if you're wondering what is this equipment used in sharpening the knife, it is a hone. Now, a hone, it is a natural stone or hard grinding surface for sharpening a knife. So, as you can see in this picture, this is an example of a hone. And there are actually different types of hone that we'll be studying today. So, these are the different types of hone. This is the first one is the Belgium yellow or the Belgian hone. Second is the Arkansas. Third is the fine carborundum, the plate glass hone, and the machine hone. So we'll be tackling this one by one. So the first one, which is the Belgium yellow or the Belgian hone, this is for manual sharpening when cutting edges has been rendered blunt or nicked. And this type usually gives the best result. So as you can see in this picture, this is a Belgium yellow or a Belgian hone. And this one is the Arkansas. It gives more polishing effect than the Belgian yellow, which is seen before this slide. This is the Belgian yellow, and this is the Arkansas, which gives more polishing effect than the Belgian hone. And the third one is the fine carborundum. It is used only for badly nicked knives, followed by either one of the first two sharpeners, which are the Belgium yellow or the Arkansas. And this is the plate glass hone. It is a piece of plate glass and its length is wider than the knife blade. And abrasive powder is used in conjunction with this for grinding and removing nicks. And diamantine is used for the final polish. Next is the machine hone. So it consists of glass disc or wheel driven by an electric motor. So the knife is pressed against the flat side of a rotating glass wheel, and the abrasive suspension is made by a mixture of alumina and 200 ml water, allowing to stand before use. So the wheel and the trough are then cleaned with soap and water for final polishing. And there are common lubricants used for honings, and these are the mineral oil, clove oil, xylene, liquid paraffin, and soapy water. So we can see that microtome knives are very delicate and requires great care and mastery. So we'll be learning on how to take care of these and how to use them. And the first one is a perfect edge for a microtome knife may be defined as the junction of the smooth plane surface at an angle of about 14 degrees. So it is to the advantage of every technologist to keep his knife as near to the standard of perfection as possible. And the second one, it is advisable to use fine yellow Belgian water stone to remove large nicks. And next is the hone should be long enough to allow the whole length of the knife edge to be sharpened in a single stroke and wide enough to sufficiently support and prevent the rocking of the knife. And when being honed, the knife should be kept flat, held to the hone by its own weight, with its edges in the direction of the motion from heel to toe under continuous but light pressure. And next, the hone should be lubricated before using with fine oil or warm soapy water. It is then washed, preferably with water, to remove all metal particles that may have been collected during the process. And whenever the sharpening is done by hand or by any one of the various machines, the edge should be finished on a leather or linen strop. And the seventh is the knife should always be wiped clean with a soft cloth before and after a series of stropping strokes and before changing from a coarse of a fine strop. And after stropping, it is satisfactorily achieved, the knife is oiled or greased to keep it from rusting, and after which the knife is kept covered in a suspension box. And the eighth, only a gentle pressure is required while stropping the knife. And speed in stropping should be avoided. So 1 full second should be allowed for each stroke to avoid injury of the strop and the knife. And the leather strop require oiling before use, such as castor oil or vegetable oil. However, treated strops should not be used for at least 24 to 28 hours after treatment. And the 11th is the mineral oil destroys the leather strop and should not be allowed to come in contact with the strop. So 1 drop of mineral oil can damage the polish of that area and permanently produce a blemish on it. And the last one is the wax should not come in contact with the strops. The used knife blades should be washed and flushed with Cylol, dried off, and wiped with a soft paper or cloth before stropping.
We will now be discussing the care and use of microtome knives. Number 1, a perfect edge for a microtome knife is at an angle of 14 degrees. It is to the advantage of every technologist to keep his or her knife as near to this standard of perfection as possible, which is 14 degrees. Number 2, it is advisable to use fine yellow Belgian water stone to remove large nicks. Number 3, the hone, or something that is used to sharpen the knife, should be long enough, which is about 8 by 3 inches. And number 4, when being honed, the knife should be kept flat. Number 5, the hone should be lubricated before using with fine oil or warm soapy water. It is then washed preferably with water to remove all metal particles. Number 6, the edge should be finished on a leather or linen strop. Number 7, the knife should always be wiped clean with a soft cloth before and after a series of stropping strokes. After stropping, the knife is oiled or greased to keep it from rusting. Number 8, only a gentle pressure is required while stropping. The natural compressibility of the leather is what actually does the work. Number 9, speed in stropping should be avoided. 1 full second should be allowed for each stroke to avoid injury of the strop and the knife. And the last 3 is leather strop require oiling before use. Castor or vegetable oil is used to treat the strop but should not be used for at least 24 to 48 hours after treatment. 11. Mineral oil destroys the leather strop and should not be allowed to come in contact with the strop. And the last one, we have a reminder that wax should not come in contact with the strop as well. And used knife blades should be washed and flushed with Cylol. After knowing how to care for and use the microtome knives, we'll be moving on to discuss the types of tissue sections under paraffin sections. We have preparation of the block and equipment, adhesives, and actual sectioning. Now let's go on to the first part, preparation of the block and equipment. So the sides, top and bottom of the tissue block are trimmed until perfectly level and all sides are parallel. The surface block is then trimmed away until the entire tissue space has been partly exposed. The block is then allowed to harden for cutting proper by facing them down in ice-cold water or refrigerator for 5 to 10 minutes, and then the block is then placed in the microtome for cutting. The next part we have is adhesives. Now this is used because it provides a strong adhesion between the glass and the tissue sections. Although adhesives do not play significant roles during the staining process, they are essential for methods entailing significant exposure of sections to acids. They are also advisable for complex or prolonged sequence and for certain tissues, such as the nervous system and the bones. They are also all protein solutions, but they are very prone to contamination, but thymol, glass rods, and clean droppers help prevent this. And the last one is that adhesives cannot be used if protein histochemical investigations are being considered. The first adhesive is found in page 100 of our book, and it's called Meyer's egg albumin. It's composed of egg white and glycerin. It says to mix well and filter through several layers of gauze, add about 100 mg of thymol crystals to prevent the growth of mold. The next one is dried albumin, which is composed of dried albumin and sodium chloride. Dissolve in 100 cc of distilled water and crystals of thymol. The third one is gelatin, and the formula is gelatin, distilled water, glycerol, and phenol crystals. It also says here that adding 15 to 30 ml of gelatin to the water in the floating out bath and mixing well is the most convenient alternative to direct coating of slides. The fourth one is gelatin chrome alum. It is made by having 1 gram of gelatin in 15 ml of cold water until it softens. 85, correction, it's not grams, but ml of boiling water is then added. And then 0.1 gram of chrome alum is added to the solution. And for use, the solution is added to the water bath. The fifth one is starch paste, and the formula is written here. It also has a note that says add thymol crystals to prevent the formation of molds. And the last one is plasma. Plasma is readily available from outdated blood stores and blood banks, disposed into a sterile tube of 0.5 ml each. And for the actual sectioning, microtome feed is then advanced some 15 to 20 between each stroke until the whole plane of the tissue is being cut. Cutting should be done with regular, even strokes. The harder the tissue, the harder the block should be. And that is all for my part.
Now we are going to talk about the floating out bath. But first, this is not the floating out bath we are going to discuss. This is the floating out bath used in histology. What is a floating out bath? It is the intermediate step between cutting paraffin sections and placing them on slides. Purpose of floating out bath. A warm water bath allows tissue to relax and smooth out prior to being mounted on a glass slide. The warmth also makes the paraffin stick to the glass slides. It is used to float paraffin ribbons, to stretch sections, and remove wrinkles and folds before placing sections on the slide. Procedures for floating out bath. First, sections are removed in ribbons of 10 to allow easy location of serial sections. It is then floated out on a water bath at 45 to 50 degrees, which is 6 to 10 degrees lower than the melting point of the wax used for embedding the tissue. This allows for the sections to flatten and prepare them for mounting into the slides. Third, folds and creases may be removed by stretching the sections gently with a pair of dissecting needles. Bubbles may be teased out from beneath the sections by also using dissecting needles. Sections can also be flattened out by placing them on a slide which has been flooded with 20% alcohol, producing convection currents which will serve to remove the creases in the tissues. Some workers prefer not to use the water bath. Instead, they place the sections on the slide, add 1 to 2 ml of water from a pasteur pipette, and then place the slide on a warm plate at 45 to 50 degrees until the section has been flattened out. Drying of sections. After draining, the sections must be fixed onto the slide. This may be done in several ways, such as in a wax oven at 56 to 60 degrees for 2 hours, in an incubator at 37 degrees overnight, on a hot plate at 45 to 55 degrees for 30 to 45 minutes, preferably inverted, The slides resting on the track line supports 3 to 4 millimeters above the plate's surface. Next, for 20 to 30 minutes at 50 to 55 degrees in a blower-type electric slide dryer. By mounting the sections in 0.1 to 0.25% aqueous floating out gelatin solution or onto albumized slides, draining excess fluid and while still moist, placing them in a covered coupling jar containing 2 to 3 ml of 40% formaldehyde in the incubator at 37 degrees for 4 to 18 hours. In urgency, by carefully holding the slide section upward above Bunsen flame until the wax just melts. And lastly, in case of nervous tissues, the best results are obtained by overnight incubation at 37 degrees. Difficulties encountered in section cutting. First is that brittle or hard tissue. Reasons are prolonged fixation, prolonged dehydration, prolonged clearing, prolonged paraffin infiltration in overheated paraffin oven, drying out of tissue before actual fixation, and failure to give special handling of tissues when treated with routine processing method. The remedy for this is that tissues may be softened by soaking in a small water dish or bowl containing water with detergent, phenol, or Moliflex. Next, clearing becomes milky as soon as tissue is placed in it. The reason for this is that water is not completely removed due to incomplete dehydration. Remedy: repeat dehydration with complete alcohol, then clear again. Next, on trimming, tissue smells of clearing agent. Reason: clearing agent is not completely removed due to insufficient impregnation. Remedy: block is trimmed down nearest to the tissue. Remaining wax is melted on embedding oven and paraffin impregnation is repeated, changing the paraffin at least once before blocking. Next, tissue is opaque. Section cutting is difficult due to the presence of alcohol. Reason is that it is insufficient clearing. Remedy: repeat clearing. If object has already been embedded, prolong clearing up to 12 hours, then re-embed. Next, tissue shrinks away from wax when trimmed. Reason: insufficient dehydration. Remedy: repeat the whole procedure. Next, tissue is soft when block is trimmed. Reason: incomplete fixation. Remedy: repeat the fixation. Next, air holes found on tissues during trimming. Reason: incomplete impregnation. Remedy: repeat impregnation. And then on trimming, wax appears crystalline or crystal-like. Reason: contaminated wax, or block is not cooled rapidly enough. Remedy: re-embed freshly filtered wax. Next, paraffin block after cooling is moist and crumbles. Reason: incomplete or insufficient paraffin impregnation. Remedy: repeat paraffin impregnation, then re-embed. And then sections fail to form ribbons. There are many reasons. First is that surfaces and edges of the block are not parallel. Remedy: retrim the block. Number two, horizontal surface of the block is not parallel to the knife. Remedy: readjust then reorient the block. Third, paraffin wax is too hard. Remedy is to coat horizontal edge of the block with wax of lower melting point. Fourth, knife is tilted too much. Remedy: reduce the tilt of the knife. Fifth, sections are too thick. Remedy: readjust the thickness of the sections. And then lastly is that knife is dull. Remedy: hone and strop. Lastly is that sections roll up on the cutting so that they adhere and get broken against the knife edge. Reason: knife is blunt. Remedy: sharpen the knife. Next is tilt of the knife is too great. Remedy: reduce the tilt. And lastly, knife edge is dirty. Remedy: clean the knife edge.
So for our last topic, we will talk about the frozen section. Frozen section is a pathological laboratory technique which is used for rapid microscopic analysis, diagnosis of a specimen, and diseases. It is usually used with oncologic surgery. The principle of frozen section is to freeze the tissue, and then the water in the tissue will be turned into ice, in which it results that the tissue will become firm and the water will act as the embedding medium. Next is the historical background. On the year 1818, the Dutch anatomist Peter Derimer made the pioneering effort of using frozen section technique for histopathological diagnosis. And since early frozen section techniques were difficult and demanding, and it required as much art as science, Hazard, Stevenson, and Doherty made the procedure and frozen section acceptable at all. The technique introduced by Hazard and Stevenson in the year 1949 is fascinating compared to modern procedures using the cryostat, in which the fresh specimen was placed in a fixative 10 times its volume and heated to about just the boiling point. This preparation will last for 1 hour, and if the cover slip was rimmed with Vermouth or flexible colloidal, this section could be preserved for several days. Doherty introduced a slight variation to the Hazard and Stevenson technique in the year 1953, in which namely he froze the tissue and fixed then directly to a Spencer microtome, and all movements of the 10 to 15 micrometer section, except the first one, was by a glass steering rod. On 1957, Tello basically perfected the technique. He suggested that the section to be subjected to a few drops of 95% alcohol and stained using the hematoxylin and eosin technique used for paraffin-embedded tissue section. Slides prepared by this method can be preserved indefinitely. He also found out that frozen sections are accurate in lesions of breast, lungs, pancreas, and gastrointestinal tract. There are two methods of preparing frozen section. The first method is the cold knife. Almost any microtome can be utilized for this purpose, provided means are made available for freezing and maintaining the specimen and the knife at low temperature. Carbon dioxide is the most commonly used freezing agent. Cold knife is a device where specimen and microtome knife cooled but sectioning done at room temperature, which is why we can see on the table that the knife and the tissue are way more cooler than the environment. These are the procedure for cold knife. First, place a piece of filter paper soaked in gum syrup at the microtome stage. The gum syrup is used when the tissue is to be cleared directly from water. Then after that, apply a short burst of carbon dioxide to freeze the filter paper on the stage. And then orient the block of tissues, which is on a 3 to 5 millimeter thick. Then apply a few drops of gum syrup and then fuse it with several intermittent bursts of carbon dioxide. A several intermittent burst of carbon dioxide can cause a rapid freezing. And then after that, lift the tissue up to the knife manually and trim until the surface is flat. And lastly, warm the surface with the finger until the hard frozen section starts to thaw and becomes invisible to the naked eye. This is the dew line, the point at which sections may then be cut at 10 micron thickness. The last method in preparing a frozen section technique is by a cryostat procedure. From the word itself, we are using a cryostat. Cryostat is used in a fresh tissue microtomy. It is consists of insulated microtome housed in an electrically driven refrigerated chamber maintained at near negative 20 degrees Celsius. Modern cryostats are caster-mounted cabinet models of open-top type, which permits an easy access and visibility through the hinged double-thickness plastic cover. And then the rust-proof microtome is usually mounted at a 45-degree angle in the stainless cabinet. They are equipped with anti-fogging, air circulating system, they drain for defrosting and serializing, and also a shelf with space for 4 to 6 metal block carriers. The temperature control varies from 10 to negative 30 degrees Celsius. Operation and maintenance of cryostat. First is it should be left on at all times. Second is it should be defrosted during the weekend. The inside of it should be cleaned and dried, and the microtome should be cleaned and oiled using a special low temperature oil. Then the knife will require almost an hour to come down to operating temperature. That's why one should always be kept in the cabinet. In order to achieve a best result from the pathologists, a faultlessly sharp knife is essential for the cryostat sectioning. And to ensure the sections will glide smoothly and freely on its surface, knife face must be kept scrupulously clean and dried. Same applies to the undersurface and edge of the anti-roll plate. Cleaning is effected by the soft tissue paper, either dry or moistened with an absolute alcohol. Next is the operating temperature and type of tissue. Because of the differences of each tissue, may it be in the composition, cellularity, connective tissue, and fat content, the tissue can be classified into 8 groups. The first group is a best cut at a temperature of -5 to -15 degrees Celsius, which are the brain, lymph nodes, liver, spleen, kidney, testes, uterine cureting, subcellular tumors, and thyroid section. On the next group, these are the best section at a temperature of -15 to -25 degrees Celsius, which are the muscle, connective tissue, pancreas, uterus, cervix, skin without a fat, a non-fatty breast tissue, ovary, prostate, tongue, and gut. And the last group is gut, which is at a temperature of -35 degrees Celsius, which is the fatty tissue. These are the skin with fatty subcutis, fatty breast, and the omental tissue. Procedure for sectioning. First is to check the cryostat temperature. It should be at a -15 to -20 degrees Celsius. And then adjust the microtome thickness to 4.5 micrometer. And then put a drop of water to the copper tissue holder. And then put the tissue into the holder and put some more drops to cover the tissue. And then after that, freeze the tissue for 6 minutes. Next is to insert the tissue holder to the block holder until it is tight. Then cut the tissue until the entire tissue surface is level. Next is to make serial sections by touching or adhering the sections to the side to stick. We should make several slides. The thinner the section is, it is more preferred. And lastly, stain it with hematoxyl and iosine stain. The advantages of frozen and cryostat section. First is it is certain staining procedure like the demonstration of fat with the oil red serum method and for certain superimpregnation methods as well as for certain methods in the central nervous system. Frozen sections are essential. And then second is it is indispensable for rapid diagnosis during the operations. And lastly, enzymes are best demonstrated in frozen or cryostat section. And lastly is the disadvantages of frozen and cryostat sections. First is that the sections do not form ribbons, but it rather stick to the knife blade. The next is that it lacks of embedding mass. The structural details tend to be somewhat distorted during the cutting and handling. Next is that the staining of frozen sections and fixed tissue is rarely satisfactory. And lastly, the freezing artifact may be produced by inappropriate techniques that includes the presence of ice crystals in the tissues, the nuclear ballooning and vacuolation, and separation of a mucosal and other epithelial tissue.